John, last week you were talking about the Sallattha Sutta.
Yeah.
You were encouraging me to read it.
Did you?
Know what I thought. I did read it. I actually wish I had the chance to read it again recently because I read it like Monday or something. That was the first time I encountered the Buddha talking about a feedback loop just between name and form and consciousness and name and form and consciousness. The first time I read it, I actually thought there was something miswritten because I was expecting it to keep going through the usual 12 links. But by the time I got through it, I realized that it was written the way it was supposed to be.
Yeah.
He was just talking about sort of this cycle.
It's one of the few times I've ever heard it referenced exactly that way. He does talk about discursive thinking, which is in a general way referring to that. But that's, to me, one of the most important and remarkable suttas in that describes his awakening. There's no mythology around it.
Right.
And he directly references dependent origination in the Eightfold Path as what was the essential learning or what he awakened to.
Yeah.
So that's the first chapter in the new book, and it's what the retreat's going to be based on that too. It's really what the Buddha awakened to, is dependent origination. And it's the adaptations to dependent origination to make it something other than that simple teaching that is the foundation for everything that followed. And really, you could point to that as the divergence between follow later. Is that licensed?
Yeah, it seems important. I don't know. Seems like a lot of things have stemmed from that, the teaching.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it really is everything.
I think, isn't there somewhere in the sutta where the Buddha is talking about recognizing intentions that arise, like recognizing that the intentions would arise for sensual pleasure or desire for dullness or whatever, and recognizing that those were, leading to suffering and unhappiness. And that part struck me a little bit too, because I think I see in myself, if I'm honest, that a lot of the intentions that arise for me aren't healthy. They're not intentions that lead to anything good.
Yeah. Again, that's the essence of the Buddhist teaching. The second factor of the Eightfold Path is right intention. Is the intention to recognize and abandon craving and clinging, ultimately craving for and clinging to ignorant views.
Yeah.
That only continue suffering.
I think it's sort of easy to say that to yourself, in the vein of I resolve to recognize and abandon all craving and clinging, but it's more interesting to ask yourself, how far are you really taking that?
Yeah.
How much are you really allowing yourself to perceive all of the intentions that are at play in your day?
Oh yeah. Again, that's the essence of the teaching. The way I see it now, how Buddhism developed in a different way from what the Buddha intended is based on that intention. And ultimately, wrong intention is the intention to continue to maintain a self-referential ego self. And so all the adaptations, I just finished an article on the Pali Canon, and in it I get into where the split actually took place between the second and the third Buddhist council, about between 150 and 300 years after his death. There was a sect, I guess I'm giving a teaching before we meditate, but there was a sect called the Mahasanghikas that wanted a more visionary type of Buddhism. They wanted to establish the Buddha as a god and one of many Buddha gods, stretching infinitely back into the past and into the future. They claimed, or they wanted to establish that the historical Buddha was simply an apparition, because if he wasn't, you can't have supernatural Buddhas. And that was the beginning of the split. At the same time, the head monk, who was named Tissa, Mangalaputta Tissa, put out the first written record of Buddhism called the Kapilavatthu, and that was the beginning of the Abhidhamma. And in that book, he wrote the book to refute what the Mahasanghikas were doing, saying that it wasn't part of what the Buddha taught, but also he introduced his own visionary ideas. And that was the beginning of Theravadan Buddhism. So even though there was a split between the Theravadins, and it continues to today between the Mahayanas, the split was based on something that was common to them both, which was adapting the Buddha's original teachings. And you can trace everything back to that. Now, when you look at the Abhidhamma is really a refutation of dependent origination. It gets into this intricate, there's a lot of different elements to the Abhidhamma, but it gets into this intricate explanation of creation. It's its own creation myth, which the Buddha doesn't even concern himself with. And it's called dependent co-arising from that point on, or dependent origination. A lot is in that little sutta, the Nagara Sutta, to keep us focused. So I'm glad you read it. Glad you brought it up.
There's a lot of there.
Yeah, I'll publish the new article on the Pali Canon, and it'll be in the new book too, but it should be online tomorrow, the next day. So I think you'll find that interesting too, because it references all of that, how it came to be. I find it fascinating. And to conclude just what I'm saying, the most fascinating thing to me, and the thing that I think we're all so fortunate about, is that through all of that, the teachings are still here. We still are able to rely on the suttas from the Pali Canon as authentic teachings because of the way they were maintained. All right, let's meditate. No extra charge tonight for the beginning talk. We'll meditate first, and tonight's talk is on the Sallattha Sutta, the sutta on the 2 arrows, which is a very important sutta, but also one of my favorite to teach because it gets right to the heart of the matter, similar to what we're talking about right now. So we'll meditate for 20 minutes. So find your relaxed meditative posture, and gently close your eyes and gently close your mouths. And take a moment to become aware of the sensation of breathing in your bodies. Just get a feel for what that's like, to be mindful of your breath in your bodies. And while remaining mindful of your breath in your bodies, notice that thoughts are flowing. We're conscious beings, thoughts should be flowing. The purpose of meditation is to not be distracted by our own thoughts. So when you find that you're caught up in your thinking again, simply acknowledge that and return your mindfulness to the sensation of breathing. Relaxing your thoughts, remaining mindful of your breathing. And we'll meditate for 20 minutes with callbacks every 5 minutes. Relaxing thoughts, remaining mindful of your breathing. Relaxing thoughts, remaining mindful of your breathing. Relaxing thoughts, remaining mindful of your breathing. If a persistent thought or feeling arises, stay with it for a moment or two. Recognize it as impermanent and return your mindfulness to the sensation of breathing. And we'll meditate for 5 more minutes. Take a moment to notice the quality of your mind. Be at peace with your mind. And when you're ready, you can gently open your eyes. So the Sallattha Sutta, the Sutta on the Two Arrows. The Sallattha Sutta is a key teaching as it clearly explains what for many is a confusing aspect of the Dhamma. In the teachings on what it means to awaken to the Four Noble Truths, the Buddha states that awakening is understanding stress and unhappiness, abandoning the cause of stress and unhappiness, experiencing the cessation of stress and unhappiness, and developing the Eightfold Path, leading to the cessation of stress and unhappiness. And he stated that continually through the 45 years of his teaching career. Understanding the First Noble Truth means understanding that as a consequence of living in the phenomenal world, there will be stress and unhappiness. There will be suffering. There will be dukkha. When the Buddha states the First Noble Truth, that's what he says. Suffering is going to occur. Dukkha will occur. It's almost have any real meaning, doesn't it? Of course, there's going to be disappointment in the world, but it's really the distraction caused by the preoccupation with dukkha that's the ultimate problem. So the Buddha could have nearly have stated the First Noble Truth as there is distraction as the common problem, but it is the preoccupation with dukkha, with all manner of disappointing experiences, unsatisfactory experiences, all the way up to the to extreme physical and emotional suffering that is included in dukkha. And dukkha is also simply describing the mundane life in the human realm, our human lives. Everything that occurs is part of dukkha. What other people are doing, especially when we find other people disappointing us in some way or even enraging us. And I'll just use the present election as a good example of that got a lot of people riled up. That's all part of dukkha. A very subtle aspect, and one of the things that we need to develop rather quickly, is when we're disappointed in ourselves, when we're judging ourselves harshly. That's part of dukkha, and it's all rooted in ignorance of Four Noble Truths. That's why I continually say, if we're going to engage in this practice or anything in life, the first thing we should do is to begin to be very gentle with ourselves, to stop judging ourselves harshly, especially in relation to how well or how not well we're engaging in the Dhamma practice. Understanding suffering is understanding that suffering is part of the experience of being alive. Attempting to negate stress is aversion to what is simply present. Creating beliefs of a better life after physical death as compensation for the suffering present in life creates more confusion and delusion, and arises due to clinging or wanting any experience to be different than it happens to be. Again, I'm not putting down religions, but most religions are kind of based on that premise that if we can just simply suffer gladly the difficulties in life, our reward will come later. And that may well be true, but the Buddha saw it a little bit differently. He taught that we shouldn't be so preoccupied with stress at all, and the reward we get is a life of lasting peace and happiness right here and right now. Where was I here? Due to anicca, impermanence, and uncertainty, there is an underlying unsatisfactory nature to human life. There is stress and unhappiness in life, and that means that anything that we find that is giving us pleasure or we're gaining satisfaction from is ultimately impermanent in nature. And if we start attaching ourselves, meaning building our life over these impermanent objects, events, views, or ideas, we're simply setting ourselves up to be disappointed. We're creating our own suffering, kind of the point of the Sallattha Sutta. In the Sallattha Sutta, a question is put to the Buddha as to what is the distinguishing factor between a well-instructed and well-informed Dhamma practitioner and those that have no understanding of the Four Noble Truths. The Buddha responds to the question, friends, an ordinary uninformed person feels feelings of pleasure, feelings of pain, and neutral feelings. One well-informed of the Four Noble Truths also feels feelings of pleasure, feelings of pain, and neutral feelings. When through the sixth sense base, the sixth sense base is our five physical senses, and that sixth sense of our ongoing consciousness, our ongoing thinking. When through the sixth sense base an uninformed person experiences a feeling of pain, they are sorrowful, they grieve, they often become distraught and irate. One feels two pains, the pain of the experience and the pain caused by the reaction arising from clinging. This would be like being hit with an arrow and then by request being hit again by an arrow. Does that make sense, that what we're doing there?
You're just making it worse.
We're just making it worse by the reaction in our minds, that by wanting whatever is occurring to be different than it is. And that could meaning wanting more of something that is giving us pleasure in the moment, or wanting to avoid anything that might impact our pleasure in the present moment. As the person is experiencing, the Buddha continues, as the person is experiencing pain, pain resistance occurs, leading to resistance obsessions. Now these words are different in the Pali Canon. But what is the Buddha is describing here is once we start having experience through contact with our physical senses moderated by our consciousness, we're creating an obsession over it. In other words, I have one piece of chocolate cake, it's really delicious, and it's made me happy, I need more chocolate cake. Or, and again, I always use that as a kind of a silly example, but anything, we do that with anything that comes along that gives us pleasure, we want more of it. And of course, the opposite of that is true. Aversion. Aversion is just the other side of the same coin of craving. Something happens that brings us disappointment, or it's an unsatisfactory experience, and we'll do anything we can to not have that experience again. We become obsessed with that. Now, to some people, that comes to a pathological level, such as in my case, becoming obsessed with alcohol and drugs for a long period of time because of how they made me feel in the moment, which was always fleeting. And that really is a problem of addiction, isn't it? If it could only last a little longer, we wouldn't. But it doesn't. And despite the consequences, and like I'm speaking from personal experience, despite the devastating consequences at times, that craving and clinging was always there until something intervened to change that. And in my case, it was initially the 12 steps, but ultimately it was the Eightfold Path that allowed me to frame my thinking in a different way so that I could effectively change it. And literally, through the Eightfold Path, rid myself of that craving and clinging. And that's true of any obsession. It doesn't have to rise to the level of addiction or compulsive behavior. We do it with everything that makes us feel good or that takes away from our pleasure. I'll read that again. As a person is experiencing pain, pain resistance occurs, leading to resistance obsession. As a person experiences pleasure, pleasure obsession occurs. Reaction, feelings, bring obsession as the uninformed does not discern what is actually present, the origination, the allure, the drawback, or the passing away of the feeling. All that we see is what's giving us pleasure or what's taking away from our pleasure. We're not, what the Buddha is pointing out here is we're not seeing it happen so quickly, almost outside of time. We're not able to observe it, but that process of being attracted to something, having that something fulfill a need in us, and then that process of now obsession of wanting more of it. Or it could be just the opposite. Something happens, we don't want any more of it. And so now we're creating an identity of things that I like and things that I don't like. Differential views. These are the views that the Buddha said are anatta. They don't constitute a self, except we use them to describe ourselves. How many times in general conversation, we tell people the things that we like as a way of describing ourselves to other people. Or we tell people the things that we don't like as a way of establishing who we are in the first arrow, referring to the metaphor in the sutta, the first arrow is simply the stress and unhappiness that occurs in the phenomenal world. The second arrow is the stress and unhappiness caused by ignorance, giving rise to clinging, craving, desire, and aversion. In other words, wanting the people and experiences of life to be different than what occurs compounds the initial pain of an experience. The Buddha continues, sensing pleasure or pain The uninformed joins with it. He's just describing clinging. The uninformed joins with it. We become one with it. It's now not enough that I want chocolate cake. I am chocolate cake. The uninformed is joined to birth, aging, sickness, death, and joined with sorrows, grief, pain, and despair. So what does he mean by that, being joined to birth? It means that we are now creating an identity. We're clinging to this identity that is simply a dispassionate occurrence of everyone that has a human life. But now this life becomes special because it's my life, because I've now created an identity over the things that have happened to me, a specialness over it. We are creating passion for the things that are giving us pleasure, and passion for the things that take away from that pleasure, even though those things are simply a part of having a human life. There's nothing special about that. But we're starting to take life personally now.
Okay, we'll get back to that.
Pardon me?
I'll have questions on that one.
Oh, sure. I mean, this is the fundamental problem that the Buddha is describing here. Through reaction to experience, the uninformed furthers their confusion and suffering, which really comes down to a baby's cry, I want more. Why can't I have more? And we do that with everything. As we get older, it's no longer appropriate for most of us to act like that, but sometimes we do. But we still internalize it. Why can't I have more of what gives me pleasure? Why can't I have more of that person or this situation, or more Yankee pennants year after year after year, instead of being disappointed when they don't make it? It's happened to me once in my life, maybe twice. Now the Buddha teaches how a person well informed of the Four Noble Truths and understanding stress and unhappiness responds to the unfolding of dukkha. A informed person, when stress arises, has no resistance. With no resistance obsession is formed. With no delight in sensual pleasure, no pleasure obsession occurs. The well-informed person discerns what is actually present and understands its origination, its allure, its drawbacks, and its passing away. And I'll add in there, he understands the impermanence of all experiences. He remains disjoined from pleasure and pain. This is the distinction between those uninformed and those well-informed of the Four Noble Truths. That's a distinction. A well-informed person, one who has developed the Four Noble Truths to a point that it's useful in their life, remains disjoined, dispassionate about what's occurring. It doesn't mean that we're not involved in our life. In fact, it means that we're involved in a much more deeper and meaningful way, because our mind isn't reactive. We're simply able to stay present with what's occurring. The things that give us pleasure give us deep pleasure, but we're not creating an identity over it. And so we're not disappointed when the last piece of chocolate cake is taken. And we don't even have to think about, boy, am I lucky that I got one piece. That's no longer part of the equation either. We're enjoying our life fully as our life unfolds. We're not preoccupied or distracted by dukkha, by the impermanence of all things. Am I clear about that, what I just said? Because again, that's really the root of the matter. The Four Noble Truths bring these are my words now. The Four Noble Truths bring an understanding of life as it is and the cause of furthering stress, unhappiness, and confusion. The Buddha's direct teachings are not salvific, offering the promise of a better life as a reward for proper behavior or suffering in this life. The Buddha's direct teachings develop the experience of lasting peace and happiness to this human life. Understanding is the key difference between what the Buddha taught and the beliefs of his time arising from the Vedas and later the Upanishads. The Vedas were the precursor to modern-day Hinduism, and the Upanishads were kind of a Protestant version of the Vedas, although they're now included in all of modern Hinduism. But the Buddha studied those during his time and rejected them, not as that they were completely useless teachings. They just didn't deliver in him the understanding of the nature of suffering, which is what he was seeking. The Buddha's direct teachings develop the experience of lasting peace and happiness in this human life. This understanding is the key difference between what the Buddha taught, I know I just read that again, and the beliefs of his time arising from the Vedas and the Upanishads. Forward a little bit. The Four Noble Truths bring lasting peace and happiness in this present life through the understanding of life in the ever-changing phenomenal world. There will be stress and unhappiness, disenchantment and disappointment. Stress is simply part of life. By radical acceptance of things as they are, with no passionate desire that the events of life be any different than what is occurring. Despite impermanence and uncertainty, the mindful experience of life remains stress-free, purposeful, and peaceful. That's the end of the article. So really what this sutta is getting to is the heart of the matter. The first noble truth states that dukkha occurs. It's going to be here. Which he describes it in very simple and direct terms. Birth is suffering, birth is painful, birth is dukkha. Sickness is suffering, aging is suffering, death is suffering. Not getting what is desired is suffering. Getting what is not desired is suffering. And then he always concludes that with saying, in short, the 5 clinging aggregates are dukkha, are suffering. And again, the 5 clinging aggregates are something that is often confusing to people, especially when they first come across it. But the 5 clinging aggregates are simply describing the personal experience of suffering. The 5 clinging aggregates are form, feeling, perceptions, mental fabrications, and the resulting ongoing consciousness rooted in ignorance of Four Noble Truths. And every one of those 5 aggregates can be seen as impermanent. They're all impermanent. Even this physical body changes moment by moment. From one moment to the next, it's a completely different body because of the way that cells and atoms come into existence and go out of existence in the blink of an eye. And again, when we develop a calmer mind, we can recognize that every one of our feelings is very impermanent, very fleeting. The perceptions we make about life are just as fleeting as the feelings, or almost as fleeting as the underlying atoms that make up all of life. And the mental fabrications, in other words, assumptions, are always changing, aren't they? And so because they're always changing, the final aggregate of ongoing consciousness is itself always changing. No matter how hard we try to fix our views on things, no matter how hard we want to maintain that the Mets are the best team forever and ever and ever, at some point something's going to happen that changes that view. Everything is impermanent. And since everything is impermanent, when we try to create a permanent identity, try to fix a view, it's prone to suffering. It's prone to ongoing confusion, delusion, and more stress in our lives. And that's how we stick that second arrow in. By wanting whatever's occurring in this moment, then it is. And that leads to the development of the understanding. It's really a profound understanding of the significant difference between acceptance and approval. It's really kind of hardwired in a Western culture, more so than like a Southeast Asian way of thinking. Well, that's been changing in the last 20 years of simply of the fleeting nature of all things, and that I cannot create a permanent identity over what's occurring. Everything is impermanent. And when we try to do the opposite, we're sticking that second arrow in. We're simply creating more stress in our lives. Acceptance is dispassionate mindfulness of life as life occurs. And life has to be this way, or I'm not going to be happy. As we develop deep concentration and the refined mindfulness of the Eightfold Path, we're able to accept things as they occur without the constant preoccupation with needing to approve of everything that occurs. And that's the difference between having a self-referential, ego-based view of life and a realistic view that doesn't have that overriding ego that's driving everything, that's driving all of our views. We stop taking life so personal. It's simply what's occurring. I often get the question, and it often arises here too, well, what happens when I let go of all those desires? Don't I need those to be involved in my life? Isn't passion a good thing? And the Buddha's not teaching that, and I hope I'm not teaching that. What the Buddha's teaching is how to not put that second arrow, how to create additional stress and distraction in our lives by simply accepting things that occur. And again, when we can separate approval from acceptance, even though when something that is unacceptable occurs, we accept it because it's what occurred. And then we can make a mindful decision about how we live our lives that is less likely to keep recreating stressful situations.
Should.
We should.
No,
But
should is one of those bad words, one of those words that get you
I should be
stuck.
doing different. Or this shouldn't happen to me. How could this happen to me?
He should be doing that. I should be doing this.
It happens because it happens. You know? that's just, again, the Buddha in his made such a profound but obvious statement in the First Noble Truth. Dukkha occurs. You know, the next thing he could have said was, you got to get used to it. You know, it's part of life. That's why I say that awakening, the best description of awakening is developing full human maturity. We stop wailing against what's just part of life. When the cookie jar is empty, it's empty. Don't be more, you know. Okay, that's the end of the talk. Any questions about the Sallattha Sutta and how it relates to the Dhamma? We'll just go around. And any other questions you have while we go around the room, now's the time. So let's start with Stefan. Always good to see you.
Good to see you too. Some of the sitting I've had this week has been unusually tranquil, and that's been nice.
Yeah.
I guess I've been challenging myself when there are not too many distracting thoughts, challenging myself to just breathe without trying to control the breath or make it any particular way, you know, and also not establish a self in reacting to the breath, like challenging myself not to say, you know, that breath was too short or whatever, which is harder than you might think.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't say that's working, but I do think that it has helped this sitting to be more settled and pleasant.
Yeah.
So, I don't know. It's been interesting to see just how subtle it is, like how instantaneously I can react to the most mundane thing, like the character of a breath, and insist on somehow relating it to a sense of self.
Yeah.
You know, it's so hard to just physically, biologically breathe and, you know, observe it and not anything else.
Yeah. Well, thank you for saying that. It's such an important understanding to develop of yourself and to see yourself doing it. Whatever the breath is what it is. Even in the Satipatthana Sutta, the 4 foundations of mindfulness. One of the suttas where the Buddha teaches the 4 foundations of mindfulness. He says, when taking a long breath, notice you're taking a long breath. When taking a short breath, notice. Meaning, just notice it. It doesn't need to be any different than it is. And that is another thing that has been taken out of context and there's been meditative practices about certain breaths and being mindful of that when it just creates more of an identity over it and more of a distraction. Whatever occurs during meditation is to be recognized as what's occurring. Come back to the sensation of breathing. And if you notice, you're also separating acceptance from approval. You're diminishing self-referential thoughts by saying this is simply what's occurring and not creating an identity over it needing to be any different or any more significant than just another breath like the millions of breaths we'll take. Thank you for bringing that up. Judy, good to see you tonight.
Hi there. How to duke it out. Yes, I react too much and it just makes things worse, and then I can't do other things I was in the middle of doing. And I realized one thing that's always been an issue for me is that I associate a desire to want to do something with whether or not I'm really going to get it done. If I don't want to do it, it's very hard for me to do it. If I do want to do it, I enjoy it, regardless of what it is. It can be, you know, so, and my husband's been saying this for years, and I didn't really realize how strange it was or how ineffective that is until I started coming here, because a task is a task. One does not necessarily have to attach an emotion to it. If you enjoy it, you enjoy it. But the task itself has to be done either way. So what happens is I get worried that I may not be able to do in the allotted time, and then it just takes me longer because I'm worried about not being able to do it.
Yep.
And then the day is gone. I said, well, what the hell did I do? I'm just worried. Or the same as spending money. So I sit there and I go, okay, do we spend a lot of money on home renovation or not? well, why do I want it? And if I want it, that's okay, but then I can't second guess spending the money on it. And, I go around in a circle, well, maybe I don't really want it. It's just too much of a hassle. Okay, but then my husband, so I have a very hard time making a decision and then just moving on.
Mhm.
And so I'm seeing that I'm attaching too much. I'm just attaching.
Stefan and I were talking about that. That was what the Buddha was describing in the Nagara Sutta, about this discursive way of thinking. We get stuck between our self-identity and the thought process that's coming out of that self-identity, and it just keeps bouncing back on it. And it's hard to get out of it and get out of that process of, what do I want? What's best? Blah, blah. And it's all because of self-referential views.
Yeah, so either decide for X, Y, and Z we're going to spend this amount of money and then move on, or say, no, I'm not going to spend this amount of money and move on. And, anytime there's a major decision in my life, this is what happens. Yeah. Whether it's something that I'm emotional about or not, if it's a major decision, I worry about making the wrong decision.
And it's great that you recognize that, because, again, as you develop the Eightfold Path and you're able to minimize the effect of an ego self, you see I don't want to use the word right answer, you see the skillful answer much more clearly, and it's dispassionate. You don't have yourself attached to it, whether it's right or wrong, doesn't really matter at that point. You just make better and more skillful decisions. So thank you for bringing that up. Diane, good to see you tonight.
Thank you for continuing to teach and having these meetings. This was pertinent. I've struggled with this client of mine for several months, almost a year, and I'm going to use words that are not nice. I saw him. He weighs almost 400 pounds, and he really disgusted me. And he has been abused every possible way, and I didn't really think that I wasn't there to save him or anything like that. I was just there to, cook meals and help him in certain ways. And occasionally I would yell at him because what he was saying was so insane. And I found that it was making me insane, and I just wanted to just get rid of him. And I'm meditating through all of this, and and in the course of meditation, it would come up with, leaving. You can do that, but it's not necessarily going to solve the problem. And I would find sometimes that my mind would obsess about how can I help him and that kind of thing. Anyway, long story short, because of the process of meditation and learning about myself with anything, I realized this guy deserves to be loved just like anybody else. And that turned the whole thing around. It wasn't, and I'm not talking romantic love or anything like that. But it's a different kind of, he deserves loving kindness and gentleness and acceptance, and acceptance, not approval. And I'm learning how to give these gifts. And I had to give them to myself first before I could give them to him. And the thing that, one of the parts of the process where I see this 2-arrow thing is I see things in my life that I had done that if they had been food, I could be 400 pounds as well. And and several other things that had they been, you know, what he had experienced, I could be a lot of things too. And then that brought me to comparing. Oh, does that make me better than him? Does that make him better than me? And that, as I took apart all of these things, it was like I set them aside. And I'm not saying that I mean, done with anything, but it was like, it was putting aside parts of myself. Oh, I don't need to compare. I don't need to do that for him. I don't need to do that for compare with me. I don't need to compare with him. And then I set that aside. And then it just kept setting aside, you know, ideas and concepts and all of those words and shoulds. And I mean, like my biggest thing was if he would eat what I think he should eat, he would be okay. And so I had to turn that around. Who says he would be okay? I mean, it just, the meditation process just takes, and it was making me see how nanny boo boo, childish my thinking is when I judge. And then as I said, I'm not done with any of this, but the more I put these things aside, there's no self. I begin to recognize that part, and it's so liberating. It's so freeing to just okay, be okay with that. And I mean, and my ego is such that it, you know, it can start at 5 o'clock in the morning all over again, and I have to start taking all these parts, you know, and letting them go, kind of thing. But the more I go through this process, I work with him Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. It's less draining. Mm-hmm. It's less work. It's less, you know, things are lessening, and and I make the most money with him. So in the long run, it's been, you know, I mean, that's not, you know, I shouldn't have said that, but it's helped me in so many ways.
You need money in the world. There's nothing wrong with that. Nothing more than making money.
It's just helped me in so many ways that it, and I when I think about, you know, if I run away and let him go, or whatever, I wouldn't have learned these lessons. And it's just been, I am very thankful for the process. And I've been knowing, you know, the information that I've learned here, gained here. And I'm thankful, I don't want to say this out loud, but I'm thankful for the experience of practicing, using what I'm learning to practice in my life. It's quite a journey.
It sure has. Well, how come you didn't want to say that out loud? That's important.
Oh, well, because inevitably there will be other lessons.
Well,
I think that's one of my biggest problems was, I mean, coming from other religious directions and beliefs in American Western culture. I want to graduate from college. I want to graduate to the next level. I want to graduate. I want there to be a period, paragraph, and I have arrived. And that's the, I think my ego just really likes to take that and rub it in my face and say, you're never going to make it, kind of just like my freaking brother did.
The Buddha taught about that 2,600 years ago. He taught about hindrances to awakening. Doubt is a big one.
So,
When we start judging ourselves, or the practice itself, it just can't possibly work, even though we know that a awakened human being did this and he taught us how to do it. That cascading effect of once you start recognizing ignorant views and letting them go, really can be astonishing. And you're able to recognize the difference between how you saw things maybe even just yesterday and how you see them today, and it completely changes the experience. You stop sticking that second arrow in.
and not just for him.
No, for everybody. That's why the most loving thing we can do for ourselves and for everyone else is to take to the Dhamma and awaken. You reminded me of something that happened on I think it was our second retreat back in 2013, I guess it was. We had a wonderful woman who was primarily a bhakti yoga practitioner. Bhakti yoga is a devotional yoga practice along with the physical asanas. A lot of emphasis is put on devotion. And I think we got to about Saturday, and I could see that she was getting more and more agitated. And she finally kind of blurted out, "Where's the love in this? Where is the love?" And I didn't have an immediate answer. I had to think about it for a little bit. In fact, I told her that because it kind of set me back on my heels. I says, I'll answer that, but not right now. And the next day, I think it was Sunday morning, that because there's nowhere that I've ever come across where the Buddha said, this is what love is. And this is, if you're going to be loving, this is how you do it. But what I realize is that the Eightfold Path is a complete path to developing true love and true compassion for ourselves and for others. The entire Dhamma, the whole entire Buddha's Dhamma is a Dhamma of true love and compassion, not needing other people to be any different than they are, including when they might be physically unattractive, and also their actions are unattractive, and yet we can still be present with them, which is the essence of love, isn't it? To be mindfully with someone without the need for it to be any different than it is. That's the essence of love, and that's exactly what the Buddha taught. That's why he is seen as, whether it's looked at that way, that's why he's seen as the most compassionate human being that's ever lived, I think, anyway.
So
Who understood it at such a high level.
when you judge, you're making it about you and not the other person.
Yeah, and it could even be a lot of altruism without true wisdom is that way. Aren't I just a wonderful person? Look how this person is so awful, but yet I was so nice to them. Mm-hmm. If you can take out this person was so awful, then you got something. We just are. We're all in dukkha together. And when we start developing a Dhamma, we realize it. That person, no matter what they've done to contribute to it, is still simply expressing the common dukkha that we all have.
And I'm no better. I'm no better.
No, and yeah, and the only I was almost going to say the judgment, but it's not really a judgment. The thing that becomes significant then, once we know for ourselves personally that there's another way to live in the world, then it really becomes our responsibility to do that. Instead of screaming that the whole world must change in order for me to be happy, we change ourselves. That's true mindfulness. It's true concentration. It's true Dhamma practice. And then we're able to, it doesn't mean that all the other awful things that continue in the world are now okay and we're just wonderful. We recognize that all of that is simply part of living in the world. And it can't be any different than it is right now. But if enough people would develop true understanding of reality, it would change. It would have a true effect. And it has. I really believe that if the Buddha didn't start teaching what he taught, and if it wasn't preserved and engaged with over the time, we probably would have blown ourselves off this planet years ago. But there's enough of us that have and I'm not saying just people that practice what the Buddha taught have done that. When what motivated Maharishi Mahesh Yogi to leave the cave and start teaching TM was that desire that if he understood that, and this is going back 60 years now maybe, the world was in such a perilous place even back then, that he left his cave and his comfortable life to teach a meditation practice with the hope that if enough people would just develop that we could save the world, that we could stop from blowing ourselves off the planet. And of course, that's a different technique that I practice and learned, and I don't teach it anymore. But that was his motivation. And it really was, even though the Buddha didn't see himself as a savior, That was his motivation too. This is the common human problem is ignorance of Four Noble Truths. And if there's a way to develop wisdom where there was once ignorance, it changes everyone. But he also realized that wasn't likely to change the whole world, but he could do what he could do. That's what we do. Thank you. Kevin, good to see you tonight.
Wow. Things to think about. I appreciate listening to all the comments made so far. I think this teaching is just another one of the essential teachings. Just it seems to me just so basic. And I guess the changes we make are incremental and a 2 steps forward and 1 step back, no matter how hard we try. I think because of our conditioning, we start to have some time making out of it. And we just have to keep bringing ourselves back to gratitude and see ourselves with that.
Yeah.
Try to do that.
Yeah, thank you, Kevin. That's exactly it. I've only read about one person that heard the Dhamma initially and awakened. That was Kandana at the first teaching. And everybody else describes this process of 2 steps forward, 1 step back. That's just the way it is. And it's because of conditioned thinking. That was what the Buddha considered before he started teaching. Buddha's cousin, Ananda, who was his attendant, heard every talk the Buddha gave for the last 25 years of his life, yet he didn't awaken until a month after the Buddha passed. And it was really because he was frustrated that he wasn't invited to the first council because he wasn't yet awakened. Oh, very good. Gonna get awake now. And that doesn't mean that it'll take 25 years for any of us, but it does mean that it takes some work. It takes some right effort. It takes an eightfold path, right? Not just determination and not just meditation. It takes that whole framework so we can see what we're doing. Thank you.
To develop that compassion, I think it is the crux of it. It's compassion and love and kindness.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that is where the love is.
Yeah. And if we're going to do that for others, it first has to be applied to ourselves. If we really want to be loving and compassionate to other people, we have to learn to be loving and compassionate to ourselves. And then we truly can be. And that doesn't mean that we can't be helpful until we develop the Dhamma completely. But that really is the most loving thing we can do. Robin, good to see you tonight. How are you?
Meditation practice has gone better.
Good.
I still get wrapped up in my insane thoughts, and then you say to stop for a moment. Those thoughts that keep coming back, and just realize they're impermanent. And try to do that. But I don't know. It's not helpful. I don't know, because I guess I shouldn't be thinking about these things when I'm meditating. Think about them later.
Yes.
There are things to be done and decisions to make and ways to react to situations. And they come up while I'm meditating. And okay, they're impermanent. But ultimately, how does that help me to deal with these things after meditation?
Oh,
I just can't get that part.
that is such a good question. Thank you, Robin. Meditation is for deepening concentration. That period of meditation, whether it's 2 minutes, 20 minutes, 30 minutes, or an hour, that's when we're deepening concentration. It's not useful to use that time for problem solving. So if you tell yourself, this is the time to meditate, whatever, again, 2 minutes, 5 minutes, whatever it is, it doesn't matter what occurs. It doesn't matter that an issue that you need to deal with, even if it's immediately after meditation comes up. I can't deal with that now. Now is the time to meditate. And it's for deepening concentration. Now off our cushions, as our concentration deepens, and we're developing the rest of the Eightfold Path, we're able to deal with those things in a much more efficient and effective way. So the self-referential ego self wants to remain distracted. And it seems like I can't spend 5 minutes unless I think about these things that I have to deal with. That's an ego self saying that. Just hoping to keep distraction going. But a meditation practice says, not right now. For this few minutes. Another way of looking at it is looking at meditation practice as a refuge, as a true refuge from the world that you've created. And I'm not saying just in your own head, in all of our heads. I'm taking refuge from that for this few minutes. And only thing I'm here to do is to be mindful of my breath. And when I find that I'm not, to come back to that breath. The only thing I'm doing right now is to deepen concentration, period. And know that you don't have to solve all the problems in your life or and I'm not saying you do this, but many people I've had plenty of students say, I just can't meditate anymore because the world is aflame. That's the Sallattha Sutta. Now is the time to meditate. Every one of us can give ourselves 5 minutes or half an hour to just meditate. That's all we do. I used to give this instruction, and I don't anymore. I don't know why. I just stopped doing it. We're getting into the meditations. Now is the time to meditate. It's not the time to problem solve. It's not the time to analyze things. It's not the time to get to the root cause, which a lot of people use meditation for. Now is the time to meditate. And I think you'll find, and I think you've already found, is that off your cushion, you are more effective in dealing with the issues of life as they come up. But it's also a common occurrence that on our cushion, there's life. It's another way of saying that I'm still distracted by dukkha because it's coming up in meditation. But don't judge yourself harshly, just come back to the practice.
And it does help a lot lengthening the meditation. Because back doing 5-10 minutes, even 15 minutes. My brother-in-law who came in here, he said it was just the longer you can meditate, the better. You maybe 15 minutes. He said, I'm not even meditating. It has to be a little bit longer to really get to the right place in your head.
Oh yeah. Again, the longer you meditate, the better, as long as that striving for it doesn't add more stress. So that's why I say start with short periods of time. But also what I found is that extremely long periods of meditation don't seem to be helpful for that many people, including myself. My typical practice is 30 minutes twice a day. Once in a while, I'll just feel like, today I feel like having an hour sitting, I'll do it, but it's not a matter of routine with me. And I've done 7 and 10 day, they're called sessions. You're literally meditating for 14 to 16 hours a day with breaks to go to the bathroom and maybe have a little meal at noon. And the biggest benefit I got out of those was that they came to an end, honestly, that they were over. And I'm not saying other people don't, but I've talked to a lot of people that kind of felt the same way. The greatest benefit was that they did come to an end. There's no account that I've ever come across that the Buddha put a time limit or put any emphasis on length of time, or emphasize that if you meditate for 7 hours straight, what he said, his instruction was to engage in this shamatha vipassana meditation the way we do, go find a root of a tree or an empty hut, and you find a quiet, secluded place and meditate. And they always taught as one factor of the Eightfold Path. So I'm not discouraging to meditate longer periods, but the ego can say, well, if 30 minutes is good, 5 days must be best. And it may or may not be, but a consistent meditation practice that you build up gradually and develop the entire framework of the Eightfold Path will bring amazing results. That's much more important than length of time, is the entire path. You were going to...
Oh, no, I was just saying that after a nice meditation, and sometimes I can't do it, after a peaceful meditation, everything just feels better for a while.
Yeah.
You realize that you've been judging, and all day long you've been I tend to worry or think about everything that needs to be done, or whatever. I get stressed out, for whatever reason, whether there is anything even that stressful. So if I get stressed out and I meditate, it's like okay, that was all silly.
Yeah, we
And
did.
so it's like resets one's perspective.
That's right. That's right. That second factor of the five clinging aggregates. Third factor, form, feeling, perspective.
And I think people get stuck in their perspective, and that's what I think is so helpful about this. It really forces you to look at your perspective.
That simple act of in meditation that we recognize we're caught up in our thoughts, come back to our breath, we're interrupting that ongoing perspective, that way of thinking in a very practical way. And so off our cushions, we can also do the same thing. We can interrupt when we're caught up in the world again. It works just like that.
Yeah. And sometimes it's not even that I'm worried about things while I'm meditating. It's just that I start to drift off a little bit and I start just thinking about other things. So it's that lack of concentration.
Yeah.
So it's like I started planning dinner before for tomorrow, and I'm like, oh, I'm supposed to be meditating now. It's like I kind of dozed, So I need to improve my concentration.
But it's important that you recognize it,
Yeah.
and that's it. Now is the time to meditate. Come back to this, and you can certainly plan dinner when you're done with meditation.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have to do it now. Robin, was that helpful too to what you brought up?
Absolutely.
Yeah, and just that you recognize. I mean, I know I say this over and over again. Just to recognize what's going on is an important part of practice. That process is it. Thank you, Joe. Good to see you.
It's been a good week for my practice. Sitting is going well. I've became aware that when I breathe, that I'm being mindful only of the inhale and not so much the exhale. And after it occurred to me when I was off the cushion, and I used to remind myself before I sit that that's what I'm about to do. And my mind, I notice, stays pretty busy for the first 5 minutes. And now that I've become aware that I was really not being as mindful on the exhale as I am with the inhale, I'm able to put more space in between thoughts. Usually after that 5 minutes has elapsed, and I'm more engaged and more able to be mindful without a struggle. I'm not driving my breath. I'm sometimes aware, or I question whether I am, and I try and set that aside and keep going as well.
Good.
I find the 15-minute to 20-minute to work for me, and the first 5 is the one that it's not a throwaway, but I'm not concentrating very effectively during the first 5 minutes. It's just the freight train of thought is so difficult to quiet.
Yeah.
I've discovered way at the bottom of your list of videos and whatnot is it's not a video actually, it's an audio, and there's just a picture of you standing in a field, and it's the awakening to the first, second, third, and the fourth noble truth.
Wow, those are old.
They are, and I guess 3 or 4 years maybe, but anyway, what I've done is they're short, 16, 17 minutes. There's a tremendous amount of wisdom in there. It's the foundation. It's because I'm the beginner, that's where I've spent a lot of my time listening to them over and over. While I'm lifting weights or doing something else, and it's quiet, and I'm able to, if I don't get it, I can just get up and hear it again, and I'll even take notes at 15 minutes or 12 minutes or whatever. There's something pertinent that I need to reflect on, and I'll go and listen to it as many times as it takes. So there's, I guess, a result of that, because it's been a pretty productive week, I'd say, is that off the cushion, I've become more aware. Instead of being reactive about things I've done, and then in hindsight saying, well, I shouldn't have reacted that way, I'm starting to recognize the Eightfold Path as things play out in a little more real time. So I'd say it's been a positive week.
Yeah, that again, Joe, that's the essence of practice, is starting to integrate the Eightfold Path as the framework for your life. You're seeing life from that perspective of right view instead of reacting immediately. And that makes all the difference. That's the beginning of real change in your life. I got to look at those videos again. I've kind of forgotten about them. I guess they're on YouTube, huh?
I usually meditate, I use your voice, and then I go over to podcasts maybe, and then as you scroll down, it'll say 60 more, 50 more, 14 more, and they're pretty much at the bottom. And I've just gotten used to, like, I'll move my laptop from where I meditate over to where I work out and plug it into the sound system, and my notes are right there, so I've got it down. I couldn't answer your question.
Yeah, it's
I
gotta
know
be.
where to find it.
Yeah, they got to be old YouTube
I guess.
videos. So, yeah, I'll take a look at them. See what I had to say back then. Thank you, Joe. Any other questions or comments before we do meta? Okay, we'll conclude with meta. There won't be a Thursday class next week or a Saturday class. We'll be on retreat up at the Dhamma Center. But the following week we'll be back on our regular schedule. So find your relaxed meditative posture and gently close your eyes and gently close your mouths. And again, take a moment to become aware of the sensation of breathing in your body. And let that mindfulness of your breath cease any distracting thoughts to the past or to the future, or that may have arisen from our talk tonight. And metta is both an aspiration for those of us developing the Eightfold Path and an expression, an ongoing expression of an awakened, fully mature human being. And these are the Buddha's words from the Karaniya Metta Sutta. This is what should be done by one who is skilled in goodness and who knows the path of peace. Let them be able and upright, straightforward and gentle in speech, humble and not conceited, contented and easily satisfied, unburdened with duties and frugal in their ways, peaceful and calm and wise and skillful, not proud or demanding in nature. Let them not do the slightest thing that the wise would later reprove. Wishing in gladness and in safety, may all beings be at ease. Whether they are weak or strong, omitting none, the great or the mighty, medium, short or small, the seen and the unseen, those living near and far away, those born and to be born, may all beings be at ease. Let none deceive another or despise any being in any state. Let none through anger or ill will wish harm upon another. Even as a mother protects with her life her child, her only child, so with a boundless heart should one cherish all living beings. Radiating kindness over the entire world, spreading upwards to the skies and downwards to the depths, outwards and unbounded, freed from hatred and ill will. Whether standing or walking, seated or lying down, free from drowsiness, one should sustain this recollection. This is said to be the sublime abiding. By not holding to fixed views, the pure-hearted one, having clarity of vision, being freed from all sense desires, is not born again into this world. Thank you all for a wonderful class. Peace.